Sustainability is a very broad term that has to do with everything people want, and lakes are one thing people want, particularly in Wisconsin, where we have 15,000 lakes.
Critical questions. How can agriculture affect the sustainability of lakes? How can agricultural practices impact groundwater?
Part of sustainable agriculture is having sustainable waters. The two of them go together.
This is an issue throughout the entire state of Wisconsin. If you happen to live in Dane County, then you know about Lake Mendota and Lake Monona, and you know that they turn green with algae virtually every summer. If you live in the central sands part of the state of Wisconsin, you know that those sandy soils will allow whatever is placed on them to permeate very quickly into the groundwater. You also know that extracting too much water for some of the larger agricultural operations has even resulted in a lowering of water levels in some of the lakes and drying up of some of the smaller streams and even rivers.
This is Wolf Lake, a place where hundreds of Portage County residents might have used 20 years ago. On a nice hot weekend here, the lake has been drawn so much by pumping here that this lake is no longer usable for fishing or swimming. The science here conclusively ties pumping to low water levels at lakes and streams and aquifers. Wolf Lake here, as well as the other lakes, are attached to groundwater. You pump groundwater out for other purposes. Water levels go down, levels at lakes go down, flows in streams go down. This issue was already known in the 1960s or 1970s. By 2005, pumping had developed to a point where that during a very modest dry period, we saw lakes disappearing and streams drying up. All waters are waters of the state. That means this Wolf Lake here, the Little Plover River, many of the other lakes and streams in central Wisconsin that have been impacted by pumping, they are something that all Wisconsinites have taken as a loss. The sustainability stool of social environment and economy has become unbalanced here, certainly on the environmental side. Others might argue also on the economic side here, because lakes like this are the calling card for places like Portage County to get new business and young people to come in. And so for the last 11, 12 years, this has been at the forefront of a lot of discussion of water sustainability.
Well, pretty much this whole region, the whole Central Sands, is all irrigated. We couldn't be growing crops here without it. We have one of the most well-replenished aquifers in North America here. We can't farm without it. Here we have some surface water issues on the divide, kind of between, that you can see maybe in the background, between where rain would fall on this side, would end up in the Mississippi River. If it fell 2 miles to our east, it would end up in Lake Michigan. And so there's some challenges along that area where they don't get a lot of runoff from rainfall.
You know, right now this pumping impact is fairly localized to this area of 100 miles by 50 miles. And if you're a person that doesn't recreate on lakes and streams, you might not even see it when it's in your backyard. And so it's a local, very serious problem. It's spreading to other parts of the state, but it hasn't grown this politically critical mass. You know, the other thing about the Central Sands situation is that this is sort of a canary in the coal mine. Farming practices also have impacts on the water quality. The chief impact is nitrate pollution. There's a drinking water standard of 10, and it's very common to find 20, 30, 40 in the groundwater in this area. To a lesser degree, there's pesticide residues that come along with it.
What we tell people is if you have well water in Wisconsin, you should get it tested for nitrates. If you have high nitrate levels, then you should really consider getting it tested for pesticides. UW-Stevens Point has a great groundwater resource center where people can look online, if you look up UW-Stevens Point, and find out what wells were tested for in your area, and it kind of gives you an idea about what you want to pay to have your well tested for.
Those of us that live out in the country, or even in a small town like Coloma, 450 people, certainly what we do on the farm has an effect on those people. But environmentally, through our work with the World Wildlife Fund and the UW, the practices we do are much more thoughtful, much more focused on their impacts than they would have been 20 years ago. There's about 100 different diseases and pests that potatoes are susceptible to, and potatoes are pretty intensively managed. We use integrated pest management. The sand is a great system. You put nutrients in, you get crops, nutrients out, but it's also an incredibly efficient leaching system if you're not using nutrients or pesticides efficiently. So it's not sustainable for us to be flushing nitrates into the groundwater. It's not, obviously we've paid for those nitrates and don't want to be doing that, but also it's not a very neighborly thing to do. So we spoon feed, which means we make lots of very small applications. We're very wary of the weather because if we put a bunch on and then we get an inch or two rainfall, it flushes through the system and then ends up in the groundwater.
I think in the current time with emphasis on business and no regulation and what people perceive as creating lots of jobs are trumping whatever environmental concerns there are, no matter how modest. The old axiom is it's easier to argue about the science than to argue about the policy direction. So if we can argue and cast aspersions on the science and say it's doubtful, that's an easier thing to argue than saying, hey, pumping is drying up the lakes and streams. Should we continue drying up the lakes and streams, or should we develop some management strategies? And a lot of times, frankly, it's easier for them to ignore the science or push it to the side because the science complicates the decision making. People are tricky creatures, the way we perceive things and the way that we act upon them. And the future is uncertain. Until something happens in the legislature, it's going to be back to the Wild West days where we're going to be permitting high-capacity wells anytime pretty much that somebody wants them without regard to lake and stream health here.